Lisa from Mobile Tech Review, and today we're going to look at the Asus Zenbook Prime UX32VD. Now, we already looked at the UX31A, which is a classic Ultrabook with ULV CPUs and SSD drives. This guy is different though. It might look the same on the outside, same beautiful shiny metal casing, thin taper design, nice looking product, but what it's got inside is dedicated graphics and a spinning hard drive with a small SSD to speed things up a little bit. So if you've had a hankering for dedicated graphics and you still want that kind of Ultrabook experience, you're out of luck until now. So there are quite a few Zenbook models on the market, and like I said, we covered the UX31A, that's a Zenbook Prime. If it has Prime in the name, that means you get an SSD drive, a backlit keyboard, and a full HD 1080p display on it. This guy here, the UX32VD, funny last two initials there, this one is an interesting machine. It's the most interesting probably of all the Zenbooks. I don't know if it's going to be the best selling among them, but it's not your classic Ultrabook insofar as it doesn't just rely on Intel HD 4000 graphics and an SSD drive. We do have Intel HD 4000 graphics and third generation Intel ULV Core i5 and i7 CPUs here, but we also have a dedicated GPU. It's the NVIDIA GT620M. So for those of you who really want an Ultrabook kind of experience, but you want a little more graphics oomph, this one is certainly worth a look. Now that adds a little bit of weight, a little bit of thickness to accommodate that dedicated GPU and the cooling that requires. So this guy is 0.7 inches at its thickest point versus about 0.67 inches on the UX31A straight Ultrabook. So we're not really talking that much there. And it weighs 3.2 pounds versus 2.86 pounds, so it's still quite light. The design is almost identical. It's really hard actually to tell them apart. We'll put them side by side in a minute so you can see, but you've got this lovely aluminum keyboard deck here, the new revised Asus keyboard with chiclet keys, much better tactile feel, backlighting, large trackpad, so-so drivers, not too horrible, certainly improved over the UX31E, and I've gotten some driver updates here that have improved both palm rejection and multi-finger scrolling, but still not among the best Windows trackpads, but it is usable. And the show stealer is that 1080p display, 1920 by 1080 pixels, really nice to screen, and no cold color bias. In fact, it's slightly on the warm side, but in a nice way. It makes humans look more human when you're watching videos, for example. If we close it, you can see we've got that swirl lid just like on the UX31A, and in fact on the UX31E, which was the first Ultrabook from Asus that came out last year. Gorgeous attention to detail. Same design really here, same kind of taper going on, really nice hardware, beautifully finished edges over here, modern angle designs. And on the bottom here, we've got the same plate with a lot of little Torx T5 screws. Now, if you unscrew that, here's the other thing that's special versus the UX31A and E. There, pretty much everything was soldered on the motherboard except for the proprietary style stick SSD drive. Here, you actually have a RAM slot. I will show you a photograph of that in a minute. And a standard conventional 2.5 inch 7mm hard drive in here. So this guy has a 500 gig hard drive and has a small SSD drive that's used for express cache with Intel. You don't have access to that, you can't put programs on it, so it's just used for speeding things up so you don't feel the slowness of the 5400 RPM standard hard drive. But that is attractive because this is upgradable. You could put your own 2.5 inch SSD drive in here. There's a lot of them on the market, the Samsung P830, the Crucial M4, OCZ has them. Of course, you're bringing up the price. This guy here comes with the Core i7 ULV 1.9 gigahertz, the 500 gig spinning conventional hard drive with the little SSD, iSSD it's called, at speed up performance, and it's $12.99. So if you start looking at SSD drives that can run anywhere from 200 up to 600 depending on your capacity you want, you're looking at a pretty expensive machine here. You're getting in Sony Vaio Z territory, but you're still not going to get the performance that the Z has. You do get the dedicated graphics here, but we'll talk more about that later because they're not the sharpest graphics on the block. Anyway, you've got your exhaust vents over here. Does not get too hot, even though it's metal, and metal transfers heat, generally speaking. It's comfortable to keep it on your lap. Hot air does blow from the vents. The hottest is, if you're really running it, say you're playing games or playing a lot of video, it can get up to about 105 right at the center of this vent right here, which I found isn't a place I particularly contact when I hold it. Here it stays in the upper 90s, the top surfaces stay in the mid 90s, so good there. If we take a look at the ports on the side up first, before we do that, these funny little grills here, this is actually where your speakers fire from, one on each side, and the speakers are mounted right underneath. Not quite as blocked as they are in the UX31 design, where the speaker is running across this way, so it's not really getting much exposure. And up top there, by the display, that is not your speaker. Here we have our 3.5mm audio jack. We have a little flashing light to tell us the machine is sleeping right now. We have the mini VGA port, and Asus includes a dongle adapter for that, so you can output to regular VGA. Full-size HDMI port versus the micro HDMI on the other Zenbook models. 2 USB 3.0 ports on this side. Here's your charging port. This side, a third USB 3.0 port, and here's your SD card slot. Again, just like the Zenbook UX31A and E, you get a USB Ethernet adapter in the box. There is no Ethernet port on this guy. Now let's compare it to the UX31A. We're talking about the same footprint here, obviously. And as we look at the side, you can see how similar they are. The same design here, slightly taller over here, and really Asus hides most of the additional size by giving it a little bit of a belly curve over here, so this plate actually has more of a curve to accommodate, well, the internals. If you look at the difference in ports, well, it's pretty obvious. Here we have one USB 3.0 port on the UX31A. We have our micro VGA and micro HDMI versus the full size here, and the 2 ports for USB here. Same placement for the power brick. They do use slightly different power bricks. The UX32 comes with a bigger power brick. Same style, that kind of black block. That's sort of a copy of Apple's MacBook Pro charger, the MacBook Air. On this side here, got the USB 3.0 port each, the SD card slot, and this guy has the headphone jack on this side. And now we've got them open side by side. This is the UX32VD. This is the UX31 here. If this display looks a little brighter to you, that's because it is. They're both full HD matte 1080p displays, and they both have similar color balance, but the Zenbook UX31A is a little bit brighter, probably because Asus was trying to save some power there, because this guy is going to consume more power with the spinning hard drive and the dedicated graphics option. Otherwise, same design on the inside. One thing I would like to point out is this guy here has a very solid keyboard deck. There's almost no trampoline. I'm pressing down pretty hard on this. It's not going anywhere. And this one, despite the fact it's a thin machine, and you usually don't see too much trampolining on a thin machine, especially the metal body. Well, this must be a pretty thin plate of metal. It's not too bad here, but it's moving some. You can see it wiggly wiggly. Over here, oh my god, this is a trampoline for a hamster right here. Look at that. So for those of you who hate trampoline-y keyboards, this guy, it has more bounce than you'd expect from a thin machine. Maybe not as bad as the HP NV15, which is a really bouncy keyboard, but it is bouncy. So other than some springiness in the keyboard deck here, I like the keyboard pretty well. Good key spacing, fairly large for a small machine. Backlit keyboard, you can enable and disable the ambient light sensor by hitting FN and A, and there's a little symbol there to indicate it, and that'll control your display and your keyboard backlighting. Actually, the detector works pretty well, so I don't have any problems with it. Not a bad typing experience. I do still prefer the UX31A Zenbook Prime for typing on them. And while we're talking about different models, this is about to get a little bit confusing, I know. As we've said, the UX31E, that was just a Zenbook, no Prime in the name. That was the first generation that came out in the fall of last year, and that ran on second generation Intel Sandy Bridge. And we have the UX32VD here, and this is the one that has the actual RAM slot, the replaceable hard drive, a spinning hard drive, dedicated graphics. There is also a UX32A, not Prime, just a Zenbook UX32A, and that's kind of the budget model. That has a Core i3 ULV CPU, and it does not have the dedicated graphics that this guy has, and that one sells for about $7.99. Probably the least attractive of the bunch. You don't get the SSD drive, you don't get the same exact level of portability, dedicated graphics, that kind of thing, and it doesn't have the full HD display. Just like the UX31A, this is an IPS display. That means wide viewing angles, none of that TN panel business where you have to shift it forward and back to kind of find the sweet spot. Really nice for doing photo editing, for watching videos, for just about anything at all. Text is very sharp, very nice if you're reading any kind of text on the machine. And it's probably what's going to set the Zenbook Prime line ahead of other Ultrabooks for some time on the market with this IPS Full HD display. Just a joy to look at. In terms of performance, again, we have the 1.9 gigahertz Intel Core i7 ULV CPU, 3rd generation Ivy Bridge with Intel HD 4000 graphics and the NVIDIA GT620M dedicated graphics. And it scores 7386 on PC Mark Vantage, which isn't bad. It's brought down a little bit by the fact that it's a spinning hard drive. PC Mark Vantage loves an SSD drive, and that's why the Core i5 UX31A that we reviewed actually scored to 12,272, so it scored faster because of the SSD drive. Now, perceived performance is affected by that because things really do launch and run more quickly when you have an SSD drive. You'll notice that Windows boots up more quickly, applications launch more quickly, they'll access documents, open them more quickly, but that doesn't mean your program itself is going to execute. Photoshop is not going to think any faster because having an SSD, for example, it's not going to process an image file other than the fact that the image file may be sitting on your SSD and may be accessed more quickly, but other than that, meh. In terms of graphics performance, with the GT620M enabled, we got 4240 on 3D Mark Vantage, and that's a pretty good score. But this, this is a lower end GPU, and this is not Kepler architecture here. This is based on Fermi architecture. I really wish that they could have gone with the GT640M or MLE like Sony did in their 13.3-inch Sony Vaio S notebook. You get a lot more performance out of that, and that's really capable of some serious gaming. This, well, it's better than the Intel HD 4000 graphics. You'll get some more performance out of it, but this is not going to have you screaming through Crysis 2 at a 1080p resolution or anything like that. In 3D Mark Vantage, the CPU scored 9,117 and the GPU scored 3,600, which compares favorably GPU-wise with the Intel HD 4000 graphics that scored 2310. So certainly there is a boost there, but I'll tell you what, we're going to have a separate gaming video. It's going to show you how some games run on this, and we certainly couldn't run at 1080p in Skyrim. We had to bring it down to 1366 by 768 and put most effects on low to actually get it to play at around 40 frames per second. Now, if you're playing some games that are still 3D and highly graphical, but a bit less demanding of the graphics card, like Left 4 Dead 2, then you're home free. But you know what? You can also do that Intel HD 4000 graphics. So that's why I'm a little on the fence as to how worthwhile it actually is to have this GT620M, especially because battery life overall, well, it's not just the graphics card, it is the spinning hard drive that uses more power, but this runs for about an hour less on a charge than the Zenbook Prime UX31A, and that means about 5 hours or maybe 4 hours and 45 minutes or so on a charge versus pretty much close to 6 hours with the UX31A. Now, most of the time I actually was not using the dedicated GPU. This uses NVIDIA Optimus that intelligently switches, and it does a fairly good job of detecting games, and in fact you can right-click on an application if you want to make sure it runs with dedicated graphics. But just doing basic productivity stuff using IE, doing email, some YouTube videos, that kind of thing, so I wasn't really pushing it into using that dedicated graphics much at all, and I really did notice about an hour less on a charge. Now, if you do take it upon yourself to upgrade to an SSD drive, and Asus says that they're going to offer one with a 256 gig SSD themselves, you probably will see an improvement in battery run times there for doing that. But again, you're getting pretty expensive there. And one thing I would mention is we reviewed the Vaio S 13.3 recently. It's about 3.4 pounds, so a little bit heavier than this. Magnesium alloy casing. Doesn't look as pretty as this. Has only a 1600 by 900 TN panel, so you're not getting this awesome display if that's one of the things that's important to you. But other than that, that machine has the NVIDIA GT640M LE. It plays games awesomely, and it has a built-in optical drive. Sony is still the best at miniaturizing things and finding a way to put stuff in. So if you're looking for an all-around little powerhouse and you want dedicated graphics and you want a game in a 13-inch machine, also consider the Vaio S 13.3. And now we'll check out some YouTube footage so you can see how it handles higher resolution video, and so you can hear the speaker. This does have Bang & Olufsen Ice Power audio, just like the UX31A. I find this to be a bit louder though. By the way, it's really nice that you can fit multiple windows here. Really, I can have this browser window be smaller, and I can have a Word document open to the side. That's what that 1080p display gets you. Asus shipped this by default at 125% font scaling to keep the fonts readable, and they actually really are. I don't have the greatest eyes and I have no trouble reading this, so it works out pretty well and still does give you enough room to have some windows side by side, or if you're using something like Photoshop, you've got room for your image and for the palette. It's something that's just about impossible if you go with a 1366 by 768 resolution that you see on most 13-inch notebooks and Ultrabooks. So let's check out our video. Look at our video review of the Asus Transformer Infinity TF700. Our volume is about 3/4 of the way up, and that's pretty loud. One of our Android tablets of the year. This is the Asus Transformer Pen Infinity TF700. A lot of parts to that name, but simply put, so now we're 1080p full screen, and this is pretty neat. You can watch 1080p at native resolution. Right here. Tegra 3 CPU. Works very well. Looks nice. Gigahertz, and we're going to look at it now. The machine has dual band Intel Wi-Fi. It's advanced N6235 dual band, and it has Intel Wi-Di wireless display. So if you've got one of those little Wi-Di receivers hooked up to your AV gear, you can wirelessly send the contents of your display or use it as a second monitor. Kind of neat if you want to play videos or movies, something like that, while actually using your computer if you wish. And it has Bluetooth 4.0. It has a 720p webcam up here with built-in microphones. Works pretty well in our tests. And you can see our Windows Experience score is right here. 7.1 for the Core i7 ULV CPU, 5.9 for memory, 6.3 for desktop aero graphics, 6.3 for gaming graphics, and 5.9 for the hard drive, since again it is a spinning hard drive, so that's about what you're going to see with the spinning hard drive. So now we're obviously in the dark, and you can see what the backlit keyboard looks like, and we're going to test for backlight bleed using this black image here, pure black. And backlight bleed, for those of you who don't know, is when you get some light bleed, whitish areas showing, and typically with Asus notebooks it's been down here when they have IPS displays. And we have brightness turned up to maximum. So you can see there's a little bit here. It's a little bit lighter on this side maybe than it is on this side, but actually it's not too bad, the backlight bleed. And really, if you're watching a movie with some black bars at the bottom, you're not going to see that too much. So really pretty good. As we change the angle, move it around, not too bad. If I tip it like that, you start to see it a little bit more, how it's coming up just at the bottom, but I would call that not bad at all for a notebook IPS display. The other complaint that some users have had on forums is with the fan, particularly in the UX32VD, and ours has behaved pretty well, other than the fact that I will say that just sitting here, it sometimes just randomly seems to cycle up. The CPU temps are usually in the upper 40s centigrade, and that's perfectly acceptable. And you can just hear it going, whoo, comes up and goes back down, but it doesn't roar, it doesn't get loud, it doesn't get freaky. In fact, most of the time, it's pretty darn cool if you're doing everyday tasks. If you're doing something like gaming, certainly the fan's going to ramp up on it. But it's not deafening or anything like that, and overall the fan behavior seems fairly good, even after hibernating, sleeping, and resuming, that kind of thing. In terms of software on this guy, it's really the same bundle as the UX31A. If you've watched that video, you can see it's, generally speaking, a lot of Asus utilities. I have a 30-day McAfee trial on here, the usual MS Office 2010 Starter Edition. Cyberlink Media Suite is here, and we've got our collection of all of these Asus utilities here. Some of them are just tutorials. You've got your manual here. You've got their camera software for the webcam. Control over the USB charging port, because one of these is a sleep and charge port. Asus web storage you get. Asus Splendid utility, which changes the color calibration of the display to try to suit what you might want to do. Like there's one for multimedia, for watching videos and all that kind of thing. I find that they're a bit too warm overall. I like just the standard one the best on that. And you get Asus's power widgets up here for switching between their power plans. They include 4 power plans, and just like with the UX31A, one thing I noticed, every time you unplug it, it's going to go to battery saver mode, and it's going to set your wireless down to maximum power savings, which is really going to kill your throughput on your Wi-Fi network. So I would say that you can go ahead and adjust that power plan setting, and put that on medium power savings or even on maximum power consumption. It's really not going to change your battery life all that much, but you don't want to ever set your Wi-Fi down to maximum power savings because it will get slow. So that's the Asus Zenbook Prime UX32VD, just now starting to appear in stores. And again, the Core i7 with the 500 gig spinning hard drive and the small caching SSD drive are the one that are most commonly available, and that sells for $12.99. You get your dedicated NVIDIA GT620M graphics in there. Machine has 4 gigs of DDR3 RAM, 1600 megahertz, and again it has that SO-DIMM slot. That's a RAM DIMM slot standard, and you can upgrade that if you want. Take out the DIMM and put one in there. Again, 8 gig if you want more memory. Honestly, Windows runs pretty well on 4 gigs. It's only when you're doing things like video editing or running many applications simultaneously that you get a whole lot of benefit of 8 gigs of RAM. And with the ULV CPU, this is not something you're going to be using for serious HD video editing anyway. But just in case, it's nice to know, be forward thinking that you can upgrade the memory on this guy. And a beautiful Ultrabook design that's still light at 3.2 pounds, very thin, 0.7 inches at the thickest point. So there's a lot of appeal here. Personally, I would lean towards getting the Zenbook Prime UX31A. I don't find the GT620M to be that remarkably good that it makes that much of a difference to me. I don't feel like I'm going to be able to play killer games on this. And again, we'll have that gaming video so you can see for yourself. And I like the longer battery life, and I like the SSD drive being built in, all for around $9.99 to $10.99 for the Core i5, a little bit more if you're going to be getting the Core i7. Between the Core i5 and the Core i7, is it really worth spending the money? Depends on what you're doing, probably not so much. Both of them are going to be equally responsive for productivity stuff like Photoshop work, even some development, that kind of thing. But if you want the all-out processing power, by all means, there's the i7 dual core for you. I'm Lisa from Mobile Tech Review. Visit our website for the full review of the Asus Zenbook Prime UX32VD, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.